just prior to jumping into our topic for today, we at Grow Up also want to acknowledge all of the gifts that Frenchie Cannoli brought us, his knowledge, his laughter, his love for cannabis, and for all of us within that cannabis community. So we just want to acknowledge that and continue to give our love and support to Kimberly and the folks at Ooh La La. So once again, thanks so much to Frenchie. And with that, I am very excited about this. If two-way humidity control had rock stars, that would be Scott Swale and Drew Emmer. And if you had an opportunity to take a look at the write-up for this webinar, it was actually Drew who brought attention to a CTV News article highlighting the fact that 80% of consumers in Ontario found that their weed was too dry. And so with that, I'm going to ask Scott Swale and Drew Emmer from Boveda to talk a little bit about our future, I suppose our crisis in our cannabis sector.
So before we get into the crisis, I love that you remembered Frenchie. Av, thank you for inviting us, Dania, Randy, all of our friends up there. We're humbled to be here to have the conversation and to have the forum to talk to all of you. But as long as you're remembering Frenchie, we'd also like to remember one of our guys, Jed Walker, represented Boveda in Canada. Many of you remember him from his tenure at Maximum Yield. A lovely guy that we lost in January suddenly. And as long as we're pausing to remember people that have made a difference in our lives, we'd like to offer up a little honor to Jed as we talk to our Canadian friends in this format, again, really for the first time since we were sequestered by all this COVID pandemic stuff. So just our hearts go out to Jed and his family and all of his friends. There's a lot of love in this guy, and he meant a great deal to us, and his spirit will live on in the things that we do, especially up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Jed was had a lot of passion for the industry and the people that were a part of it, the plant, and so we're doing our best at Boveda to live that out for him and some of the things that he wanted to get done while he was at Boveda. So miss him a lot and hope we can honor his name greatly in the future. So thanks, Drew.
So that's Scott Swale. He represents Boveda in Canada. He manages our business up there. He's a dad. He's got a couple of young boys. He's a husband. He's an outdoorsman. He's a lovely human being, and I feel blessed to work with him. You want to introduce me? Try to top that.
Yeah, Drew is single, and he is also an outdoorsman. He's super funny, genuine. If you've had the chance to meet him at a trade show or any cannabis event, he's probably came up and made a pretty big impact or a lasting impression. And he's just passionate about helping people. And that's what we're here to do is help brands and growers, achieve the highest quality that they can and maintain that high quality. So that's why we're here.
So the narrative shifted. You want me to just start riffing on this, Af? Because we can just go.
Oh, I'd like to make a nice plug for Cultivate as well. So if you want to catch them riffing, check out Cultivate on YouTube. There are good history of videos there, and there are some. There should be a blooper reel, or actually, you don't seem to edit the bloopers. You just.
We actually produce a blooper reel every year, and that's also available.
I look forward to that.
We've made some horrendous mistakes and had a lot of fun recovering from them. So the genesis of this whole conversation happened when Av called and said, we hear from certain people that Boveda steals terps, steals the smell out of my weed. And we've heard that a lot, especially as we've had more and more competition in the marketplace. People are, how do you say this politely? when you're a leading brand in a category, people tend to take shots at you. And so instead of getting defensive, we get curious when people raise issues like this smell question. Anybody that's ever loved cannabis knows that when you open a bag and take a nose hit off the bag, that bouquet that you get has like an instantaneous emotional reaction. You have this love of that smell. I mean, you're getting this big nose hit of terpenes. And when you do use Boveda two-way humidity control packs, if you have proper, precise two-way humidity control in that container, when you open it, you're going to have a slightly muted nose compared to what you're used to. And that's not because we've stolen any terps. It's because with proper, precise two-way humidity control, you sequester more of the terps in the flower. Those terps are expressing themselves before you even cut down the plant. You cut down the plant, you dry it, you cure it, it's expressing terpenes. Every bit of water that necessarily has to come out of that flower, every bit of that is also off-gassing volatile organic compounds, terpenes. And our job, and what we take very seriously, is when you use Boveda, you actually create a monolayer of moisture around the trichomes and you keep most of the terpenes in the flower. So when you go to crack it or to grind it or however you go to consume it, you're able to enjoy the maximum amount of terpenes available in that flower. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And, you know, just back to what Drew said about us being curious and wanting to learn, obviously, the more and more that we have people coming to us saying, hey, there's a muted smell when I use Boveda or it's different. You know, at first, the natural reaction is, no, that's not happening. But we're curious. We love to do research and dive into things. And so we went to work for really almost 3 years, really looking at, hey, what is happening when Boveda is stored inside an airtight container with cannabis? And what are the long-term, short-term effects of that? And that's where we found out that, hey, yeah, there is a muted smell, and that's because Boveda is actually keeping those terpenes protected inside the trichome head. So then when it's ground or you go to consume it, you're getting all of that. And
Scott, do you mind just telling us a little bit more? Drew used the word monolayer.
Yeah,
explaining that a bit.
Yeah, so it's really a thin layer of water molecules that get formed around the trichome, the waxy head. So this has been going on in the food industry for a while and has been known in the food industry as something that happens. It's not necessarily something visual that you're going to see because it's so microscopic, but it's this thin layer of water that goes around the trichome head and it protects it from oxygen coming in. And so what happens to a trichome head as it dries out, they become brittle, they crack open, and everything that's inside of there evaporates out. So as you're getting that massive nose hit, yes, it smells awesome. I'm on the same page. I think I love that smell. But what I'm smelling is left the cannabis plant and is never going back in there. So now, yeah, it's great to smell, but you're not getting the benefits and the effects from those terpenes as you consume the cannabis itself.
So let's talk about timing for a second, because certain parts of the Canadian marketplace, timing is everything. And we acknowledge that there are brands in Canada that are growing and producing wonderful, delicious, dank bud. The problem is the distribution process. If you go through the Ontario Cannabis Store, right, the time from when it leaves your dock in wherever you're located and goes through the OCS, what kind of range, what kind of time constraints are we talking about? 6 months?
I mean, I think they're getting slightly better, but yeah, it's months. I mean, there was stuff packaged that was 8 months old that people are receiving, you know, so it varies, but yeah, it's a long time frame.
So let me set this up. There's a window of enjoyment. And a lot of times people at the plant or the producer end of things, when they've got that cure and that drying process done, they have that bud in the best possible condition for consumption. And it's naturally, without protection, going to be in that window of quality for that high level of consumption for a couple of weeks. Because what happens when you package it and you ship it off the dock and it goes in the truck and then however it gets to Ontario, every day, every morning and night, the sun rises and falls, the temperature rises and falls. What we call the equilibrium relative humidity inside of that package changes. So whenever the temperature or the humidity changes inside of that package, something has to act as the sacrificial lamb to give up the moisture. It's either going to be the bud giving up the moisture, or it's going to be the two-way humidity pack that's giving up the moisture. So the studies that we've done, we've got all sorts of results that range anywhere from 30 to 40% of the available terpenes in the flower are dissipating within the first 3 weeks after it comes out of the production zone. So one word of encouragement to processors and growers: if you don't measure it, it's just an opinion. So we found that you have to measure everything. You have to measure the water activity when you're curing it. You have to keep track of the temperature. You have all sorts of hoops that you jump through to get your COAs, testing labs. I don't know who's the best yet in Canada as far as measuring terpenes accurately, but we would love to have people develop SOPs where they measure the terpenes at the point of production, and we also have an opportunity to measure the terpenes at the point of consumption. Then we'd really start to know something. Then we'd really start to have some data points about what kind of quality people are getting. If you lose 40% or 50% of those terpenes in transit, it's a dramatically different experience for the cannabis consumer. And you guys spend so much time and so much money on building beautiful brands. You get some gorgeous brands in Canada, really well done design, packaging, everything looks beautiful. But even if you have the best bag or the best jar, you don't compensate for what's happening inside the container. So if you want to test that, if you want us to engage in working with labs and working with you on measuring those terpenes at the production end and at the consumption end, we've literally gone into dispensaries and bought the products that you produce, and we measure those water activity levels, and we also are more than willing to measure the cannabinoid levels and the terpene levels in that flower. And we'll feed that data back to you. We're not publishing a journal. We're not going to go public with what's happened to your bud from the time it left BC until the time it got to Ontario. But we'd be happy to provide you that data and hopefully come up with a forum for conversation where we can show you why it makes sense to properly protect it with precise two-way humidity control.
Super, thanks. And further to that, when we post this video, we'll include your emails if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Drew is the strategic relationship person at Boveda, and Scott is your sort of account manager.
Yep.
Scotty manages Canada.
Yep. And one thing too, I wanted to reiterate what Drew was saying is, we've heard this a few times that people feel like if they put Boveda in with their cannabis, that it shows the consumer that they messed up somehow. Okay. And really what we're trying to tell people is, no, you haven't messed up. You've done everything right up until the point that it gets packaged. And what we're trying to have you realize is that there's still an important part of the process that has to happen. And that's the transit, the time it sits on the shelf, the time that it might sit in the consumer's car or at their house. You need to protect that quality through that stage. So you can do everything right on the front end and produce the best product out there. But if you forget about it after it leaves your facility, bad things can happen. And there's a really cool, we started in the cigar industry, and a very prominent cigar manufacturer, Fuente, who has probably the most well-known brand among, just the high quality, high-end cigar market, was having issues with his cigars when they'd reach the stores and then get into the consumer's hands. They weren't the same quality than when he was smoking them after being rolled in the Dominican. So what he wanted to do is he wanted his consumers to have the same experience he was having in the Dominican, where the humidity is perfect, it's at the right level, and he's experiencing this wonderful cigar. Well, he wanted his customers to have that same experience. And so he started using Boveda because he found that, hey, I can include this Boveda product in my boxes, and it's going to protect it when it's on the airplane or in the boat. So then when my customers get that box and open it up, they're experiencing that same experience I had here at the factory in the Dominican. And that's really the same thing with cannabis that we're trying to do, is maintain all that quality that's happening right on the front side and bring that through until it reaches the end consumer.
And that's, I think, what every cultivation team would want too, right? They want you to experience what they would be able to experience. But before I get Drew to jump in here, I did, we typically think of putting a Boveda pack in that final product. I do want to know where else Boveda can work in that post-harvest processing. But prior to that, you've dropped a few other terms that maybe some of our audience members might want some clarity on. Water activity and relative humidity, or internal relative humidity. If you could maybe talk a little bit about that. And to our audience members, it's very, very obvious for you to see right now that I don't really have much of a role here. Scott and Drew can talk on and on about anything. So please feel free to put in some questions in the chat. I will be looking through the chat and I'll throw them out to Scott and Drew and let them go. So let's talk water activity.
Yeah, and really quick too to add on, you mentioned our emails. We'll provide to you guys all of the studies and different tests that we've done. So if anyone's interested in looking at that, we for sure can dive into that deeper after the call. But yeah, so water activity is the most safe way to measure the moisture levels inside of a product. And so the easiest way to think about, there's active water and bound water. Bound water only comes out of a product typically from pressure or heat. So if you think of a sponge, you soak a sponge in water and you squeeze out all the water, or as much as you can. That's all the active water leaving that sponge. The sponge is still going to have some moisture and water in there. That would be the bound water. So water activity is read in a decimal point. So basically, if you take RH of a product, so let's say it's 65% RH, that's going to directly translate to 0.65 water activity. How much more? I mean, you want me to keep going on that a little bit? But
no, and maybe you can tie that into your own packs that are 62 and 58.
Yeah, correct. Yep. So basically, when you're measuring the moisture inside of cannabis, typically it's done through moisture content. And that can be sometimes an inaccurate way to measure the safety of your cannabis from a moisture standpoint, because that number can change whether the product is either giving off moisture or absorbing. So if you look at an isotherm chart where it's deabsorbing or absorbing, that moisture content number will change on that chart depending on whether it's going up or down, or giving off or absorbing water. So water activity is a really safe way to measure. ASTM is an international standards board, and they put out that the safe water activity range for cannabis is between 0.55 and 0.65. So once you get over that 0.65, that's when you start running into issues with potential mold growth and other things that obviously aren't good. Now, once you hit that 0.55 and below, the degradation of the quality of the cannabis begins to increase as that number drops more. So the terpene degradation after 0.55 begins to increase and pick up as that goes on.
I got a couple other notions I'd love to introduce unless Av wants to redirect.
No, you go right ahead, and I'll follow up with questions soon.
So I love clearing up wives' tales. So one of the wives' tales we started with was Boveda steals terps or steals smell, which it doesn't do. We're happy to go into that in more detail directly with you at any time. Please reach out to us. The other big wives' tale about Boveda is that salt is somehow bad. One of our competitors decided that they'd attack us on the very strength of our product. The key to our product is a salt formula. Each one of our humidity levels is a different natural salt or blend of natural salts that resonates at that particular humidity level. And it's the dynamic from salt is such that it's the most precise way to maintain humidity. There's nothing else that we know of so far that does a better job of precisely managing relative humidity. So the Boveda Pack is simply that natural salt or blend of natural salts, a binding agent, and water. And the only thing that comes out of that pack or goes into that pack is water vapor. So that's one wives' tale. The other wives' tale is that, what was the gas that they said we emitted? There was a big.
Yeah, I think, there's misconceptions that Boveda gives off or again, just absorbs terpenes. And it's not true. Again, if you want to have a further, more in-depth conversation, I think we can do that offline. And we have the studies, multiple studies over the years that will look at a Boveda Pack that's been in with cannabis or another product for a significant amount of time. And then we cut that open, test what's inside. And yeah, it's not true. That's just the bottom line. And again, we're happy to have further conversations about that.
So one of our friends in the other room just held up a sign with the word acetone on it because I had forgotten what it was called. And then I had to wave him closer because I can't read that far away. So there was a study put out by a lab that Boveda puts out a certain amount of acetone. It sounds terrible. But in reality, the way the study reads, it's measured in parts per billion, and all the standards are expressed in parts per million, pretty significant difference. And we're individually, right now, I'm emitting far more acetone just by speaking than a Boveda Pack would ever impart. So I do not begrudge people going out of their way to try to make a living and hustling and working hard. Some of our competitors are some of the hardest working people I've ever run into. And there's some really great salespeople. What we ask everybody to do is don't take the salesman's word for it. Don't take Scott's word for it or my word for it. Let's set you up, do your own testing, use your own measurements, use your own taste buds and your own nose to ascertain what the best quality outcome is for your flower. And that kind of covers the wives' tale part of the program.
I just wanted to mention that, for folks who've been looking through the chat, there's a couple of labs who've commented that they have the ability to do some of that testing. Beth Ryder from the C45 Quality Association, she's encouraging that, perhaps we can, Boveda and perhaps other humidity control companies could try to do a pre and post market study on the quality and quantity of terpenes. And
it's a great idea.
Yeah, so we actually have, we did one of those stability tests that measured the terpenes in cannabis right after harvest and the curing process, and then Boveda got introduced, and we ran that. Like Drew said, I think 30, 60, 90, maybe 120 and beyond. I think the goal is to get to a year. And so we're measuring those levels of terpenes. And that's where a lot of this is coming from when Drew mentioned that in the first 2 to 3 weeks, 40% of those terpenes are lost. And that's like the most crucial time to stop the degradation of the trichomes is those first few weeks after your curing and drying process. So again, yeah, we'd love to, any other stability testing that people want to partner with, like we're all for it. Like I said, we're curious. We want to continue to learn. We're not claiming we know everything, but we've spent a lot of time and energy on understanding terpenes and what's happening. And we want to learn more. And we welcome anyone that's willing to partner with us on that.
And here's why it's important. The reason why it's important is the narrative in the cannabis industry changed. The narrative in the cannabis industry up until 2 years ago was all about access. People were talking about how they got connected to cannabis. And almost magically, a year and a half ago, maybe a little more, closer to 2 years ago, it's all a blur with this pandemic. The way to measure time seems so different. It shifted to a conversation about quality. And when the conversation about quality happened, and this CTV article that we cited in the workup for the show, that blew me away. They did a survey of people at the dispensary level experiencing Toronto distributed cannabis, and 80% of them responded that it was too dry. And the justification in the article, as they further went into the details, they explained why so many people in the Toronto market were still buying on the unregulated market, because people were able to get a better quality, equal amount of accessibility, even though there was a significant amount of risk, I suppose. But they also had the quality that they were looking for. It wasn't dry.
And
So if you,
perhaps even the quantity. So when you
right,
when you bought a gram, it was a gram.
Yeah, that's another big thing, that's happened and kind of gets overlooked sometimes is the weight of the product. The way that you pay for cannabis is based off of the weight. So when it gets weighed in August and it's pretty, still humid out up in Toronto, and it gets weighed at 3.5, and then by the time that the consumer gets it, maybe it's December by that time and it's really dry, well, that product's lost weight. Whether or not it's airtight container or what, it's still going to lose weight in that time frame. And then the consumer gets it, they go home, weigh it as most do, and if it's underweight, they're going to be pissed. They paid for 3.5 grams, they want 3.5 grams, especially on a medical side. We talk about this. When you're a patient and you're using cannabis for something serious, you need consistency and quality every time, because you're expecting this to perform the same way every time. Well, if it's not properly stored, the terpene levels and everything else could degrade from one order to the next. And then the weight too. You would never go and buy Advil from a pharmacy and you're supposed to get 30 Advil in this jar, and every once in a while there's 25 or 24 or even 28. You would immediately go back, demand your money back. And so I think the goal is to get to the cannabis industry to a point where there is that level of consistency and quality every time. And that's what we're here to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think that's great in terms of keeping good, brand reputation and whatnot. I was also thinking on the other end, as a LP, some of the fear that we have around microbials, some of the drying and curing process has often taken, the post-harvest regulatory people may choose to dry their product further down because they may not be using a two-way humidity control, and therefore they're drying it down to a much lower moisture content. Well, that just turns out to a loss in profits. Do you want to speak a little bit of how Boveda can actually make you money by using it?
Yeah, no, it's a great call, Av. We always say moisture equals weight equals money. And so when you look at a Boveda pack, our 67 gram size, that's how much it weighs. So that's the amount of solution that's inside of that pack. That specific pack is typically used for 1 pound or 454 grams of cannabis. Inside of that pack, it can give off roughly 35 to 40% of its weight in moisture. So if you do the math on that, how many more grams did you just add back into that pound because it was underweight? So exactly when you're concerned about microbial growth and all that comes with that, then yes, the natural instinct is to dry it down to a really safe level. Well, what you've done is, one, your quality has gone out the door. Two, you're leaving money on the table, and you can use a product like Boveda that can actually maintain that weight and moisture level, keep it in a safe level, so you're not going to run into that risk of mold growth, and then also maintain the quality. And again, yeah, that's a huge part. I think that we maybe don't talk about enough, but it's a huge part of what Boveda does and brings to the table for these producers.
So
Yeah, and one of the, go
yeah.
ahead.
I was just going to say, perhaps you could take us through a scenario in which how you would use Boveda right from drying, curing, perhaps to packaging.
Yeah. Perfect. No, yeah. So, you go through your drying, curing process, you cut it down, whatever. I know it's the curing window in Canada is very short from what we've experienced, where, you go to somewhere like Northern California and they like to do it, 2 weeks if they can. But whatever that process is, after you've done your typical drying process, then you're going to add Boveda into that bulk storage. And what that's going to do is maintain that quality of that bulk product until it gets processed. So what we hear a lot again is, well, we sell our product so fast, we don't need your product. Well, if you look at the study and research that we've done and others have done, it shows that the majority of that quality is lost within the first 3 weeks. So it's crucial to protect that from the start and maintain that quality. Boveda is never going to bring back terpenes. So that's another thing, is we're not going to re-add terpenes back into your product. It's going to, when Boveda gets introduced, that's where they're going to be at. So the sooner Boveda gets in there, the more terpenes are maintained or retained in the product until it gets consumed. Then after, it sits in your vault or wherever, and it goes down to processing, gets broken down into whether it's pre-rolls or milled flower or just full bud, then boom, Boveda gets introduced immediately into that final package container, and then it's off to the consumers. And we have a lot of brands that are starting to do this, and they're having just phenomenal feedback and success with their consumer base of just, the consumers are instantly noticing a difference in quality, and just, again, back to the consistency of product. They're getting the same quality every time. It's not, one day it's great, and then you could go back a week later and you have bone dry stuff. So
From a consumer's perspective, if you ask the question, would you want the product protected by Boveda? The answer is obviously yes, because the consumer is willing to pay more at the point of purchase to get, if they were not packaging with Boveda at the plant, the consumer wants to buy the pack and put it in their jar right away. Because that's the best they can do for having, while we don't bring the terpenes back that have been lost, you do bring back a bunch of qualities, the tactile qualities of the sponginess of the flower, the smoothness of the smoke going down your throat, doesn't harsh your throat like super baked weed does when it shows up, parched. The consumer is tuned in, or they're becoming tuned in to the idea of having a quality experience. So either the producer puts it in from the point of packaging to delivery through the retail chain, whatever that is. Either that or the consumer buys it aftermarket. If you would look at Boveda's overall business, we've had a dramatic increase in working with cultivators and producers. We've also had a huge increase in our consumer business. Small sizes that people are buying to put in stashes, like the Sea Vault or the Medtainer or whatever container people want to use. We have a lot of information about that we're happy to share with anybody that's interested. If you reach out to Scott or myself, we'll give you the details.
yeah, I can tease that a little bit. We wanted to hear from consumers what they prefer and what they're experiencing, because we obviously have our own conclusions internally here at Boveda, but we wanted to make sure that our customers and your customers as an LP are experiencing the same thing. And so we kind of put ourselves out there a little bit, and it's called the Boveda Challenge. And we created this challenge kit. I know it started with Sea Vaults. I think it might be glass ball jars now, but it has everything inside this kit that you need to test Boveda aside from the cannabis. So you'd have to use your own cannabis, but basically to dumb it down, it's 2 jars, and you're going to put cannabis in one jar with Boveda, cannabis in another jar without, let it sit for, I think it's 14 days or a little bit longer if you want to. And then you're going to weigh it, you're going to measure just from your own senses, kind of feel it and everything, smell it and record what you're smelling from the 2 different ones. and then grind it up, smell it again, and then consume them and give us your feedback. And so I know we're over like 3,000 people that have taken this challenge.
Can
Everyone
they
from
still take the challenge? They can still
Yeah,
sign up.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Go to the
so
website? Perfect.
yeah, yep. If you reach out to me, we'll get you hooked up.
But tell them the results.
Yeah, so over 3,000 people have taken this, and as we sit today, we're at 97% of those 3,000 have said the product stored with Boveda had a better nose hit after post grind, after it's been ground up, and then the consumption of it was tenfold from the product that wasn't stored with Boveda. And this is not made up. This is real results from consumers and people that are buying products from the OCS and in different retail stores. And we've partnered with some of the LPs where we've given a challenge to get to their whole internal team, and they do the test on their own. And so again, we're putting ourselves out there, but we stand by the results and what's happening. And we think it's a great way for people to experience on their own what Boveda can do for their product.
Perfect. I've got a few questions here from the listenees. So how long does Boveda last? Does Boveda freeze? Do you get discoloration even with using a Boveda over time? And how do you determine whether you're going to choose a 62 or a 58?
Great questions.
That's a lot of questions all in one. Is that all from one person?
No, I just I figured you could handle a lot, Drew.
You condensed it?
Yeah, no, I'll try to run through that. So how long does it last? There's really three major factors that contribute to that. And one is how dry is your cannabis when Boveda is introduced? So the way Boveda works is it has a certain amount of available water that it can give off to rehydrate. That's how we come up with, what size is right for the right amount of cannabis. So obviously if you have a really dry product, really dry cannabis, that Boveda is going to have to work really hard or give off a lot of its available water from the start to bring that cannabis up to equilibrium, which is 62 or 58 in this case.
So it's not going to last as long.
So it won't last as long. Now, let's say you cured and did your whole drying process and it was perfect and you were right at, right around 62%, and you threw that in a really airtight container, you could see a year or longer of working life in there. Versus, now let me jump to the second thing, that is the quality of the container or bag that you're storing in. So let's say you run up to your local grocery store, buy some Ziploc bags, throw your weed in there with the Boveda. You could expect maybe a month of working life because the water vapor transmission rate of that Ziploc bag is very high. So it's allowing water vapor in and out through the bag. The seal might not be as well as something else, but if you have a C-vault, airtight, no lights getting in, there's no water vapor transmission rate through the stainless steel. Well, then again, you could have upwards of 6, maybe a year, depending on the quality of the bud. And then the third thing is how often you go into your container. So if you're going into your container 5-10 times a day, well, every time you open and then close that, the outside air, let's say you're in Minnesota where we are, and it's middle of winter and it's 10% RH, it's super dry. Well, you just close that airtight container with 10%, and the Boveda Pack then has to re-equilibrate that environment inside of there. So those are the three big things, but typically we're seeing a 2 to 4 month working lifespan in the typical applications.
And does it freeze? It's a great question. So I typically tell people you want to treat your cannabis like you treat your kids. You don't leave them in the car in the heat, and you don't leave them in the car in the cold. You keep them at an ambient temperature between, say, 45 or 50 and
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, what is it?
I can't do that.
I'm sorry, that's but there is a temperature factor on either end of the spectrum where the performance of the Boveda does get affected in extreme heat or in extreme cold.
Because it's having to adjust to that new environment. So as Drew was talking about in transit, when a product goes up in the plane, it typically gets very cold. If it's in a truck that has no AC in the middle of summer, well, it's going to get really hot. So that Boveda then is going to have to work a little bit harder to make those adjustments to dial it into that 62 or 58. The cool thing with Boveda though is it can work in really extreme environments. So just because a product is frozen, Boveda will still work. I don't remember the exact temperature, but it is well below freezing. So if that's important, reach out and we can get you those exact numbers and talk through that in further detail.
Let's talk about discoloration. Cannabis flower is always changing from the time you harvest it. It's constantly changing and the color is always changing. Some things accelerate it. Oxidation accelerates it. And it also depends on the water activity in the bud and the density of the bud. You get different results with different cultivars in different climates. The Boveda generally will slow down the process of discoloration. The best analogy that I use for when I'm talking to people is you have a window of enjoyment. If we could all enjoy the bud within the 2 weeks that it was finished up at the producer's location, if we could all just sit there and sesh out on that bud right there, we'd have a spectacular experience. So our job and what we're intent on doing is expanding the window of enjoyment. So we're going to take a 2 to 4 week experience and turn it into a 4 month to 6 month experience with opening and closing and perhaps longer, depending on the circumstances where you are, if you keep it sealed. So discoloration is not something that's accelerated by Boveda. It's something that is decelerated by proper humidity control, keeping the bud out of the light, and depending on how much oxygen is getting at the bud. And then the other question was about 62 or 58.
Yeah, so really we have the two different RH levels. So we started with 62, and that was after years of testing cannabis, working with groups in California. This is a while ago. I think back in, I don't know, 12 years ago, when maybe 13 now, we had the first cannabis producer out in California, first to us, come and say, hey, we're using your cigar RH levels for cannabis. They're slightly too high. Could you make something more specific for cannabis? So we spent a lot of time in research just determining that, hey, 62%, I do want to call that out and give us props, that 62% was through our research and study, and we determined that that is the most ideal level for the widest variety of cultivars. Now, we had some people, I think it really started in Colorado, where it's bone dry and they're used to bone dry weed. So when they would get weed that was properly stored with Boveda, they're like, this is there's too much moisture, we hate it, which was just because they were so used to really, really what we call a crappy weed. And so we came up with a 58, slightly lower, slightly drier, still in that 55 to 65 window that the ASTM standards calls as the ideal range for cannabis. And then we do see a lot of people that like joints or have joints as a brand use our 58 because it's just a little bit more consistent of a smoke. But really, bottom line, 62, you're just gonna have a slightly stickier, heavier bud.
And it's personal preference.
Yeah.
You try them out, decide what you like, and go the direction that is most pleasing to you.
Yep. So I saw Jonathan said he uses 62 for vape and 58 for bud. So there's a lot of personal preference out there for what you like and dialing that in. I will call out that the majority of the Canadian LPs and brands use 62, and that is definitely our most popular RH level among all of our customers. So
there was a burping question too that popped up. Scotty, what do you do? Do you have to burp the jars with the Boveda packs in them?
Yeah, so typically you burp for two reasons. That's for the off gas that's happening as that plant is curing and decomposing. There's off gas that happens. So you would burp to release that out and get that smell and everything out of the container. The other reason that people burp is to try to dial in the moisture at a slow rate. So after they do their typical curing, or drying process, then boom, they're gonna slowly burp that to slowly allow moisture out. Well, you can remove that step. Boveda is going to take care of that moisture side of things, but we still recommend that you would burp to let that off gassing out. And that might be less frequent than you typically would do for both, but we still, the off gassing is still happening and you need to get that out.
Perfect. I was just going to very quickly ask you, what are some of the common mistakes people are doing using a Boveda?
Good question. Yeah, no, I think maybe the biggest mistake is it's hard to say. It's using the wrong size for the amount of cannabis that you have. So someone will, go online and buy our 8-gram size, which is used for an ounce.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll put that in with a pound and say, your product doesn't work, it sucks, it didn't do anything in it. And then through a series of questions and talking with, whoever it might be, you find out that, oh, hey, it was just simply that you were using the wrong size. So let's make sure that for your specific application, we have the right size. Now we have the standard, like for our 67-gram size pack, it's for 1 pound. Well, your operation might be different in the way you do things and how you're set up. So again, if you are interested in having a further conversation about the way you're doing things and how Boveda fits into that, then reach out. And that's what I'm here for. Drew will help with. Brian, who's our director of R&D, is very hands-on with cannabis, hemp, and he's been in the packaging world. So we're more than happy to help get you set up specifically for your operation.
Other mistakes people make besides not using Boveda is to, that's probably the biggest mistake, is not using it. That's kind of a salesy thing. People mix RHs, they'll have 62s and 58s in a container together, which is counterproductive. The Boveda pack works really hard, so one of those packs is going to win. And it sort of...
the 62 is giving off, like working hard, giving off all of its moisture, while the 58 then is just sucking that in faster than, and then you just have this weird battle. So yeah. Otherwise it's fairly foolproof. I mean, you put the Boveda pack in the container and there's really nothing else that you have to do except enjoy the cannabis when you want to.
Right. Great.
One thing too is make sure that you do your normal drying process. Don't cut the cannabis off and then throw Boveda in there and close it up and expect the Boveda to do that full drying process. We still encourage that you go through that normal drying process and then allow Boveda to do that fine tuning at the end of it, where maybe you slightly over dried or not quite enough. And then Boveda will do that fine tune adjustment to bring it right to 62 or 58.
So let's maybe just follow up on that over drying process. I think you've made mention that moisture content isn't probably the best thing. And for the most part, most LPs don't have something that can accurately measure water activity. Have you seen, I know the GemmaCert can do that. Those who can afford it maybe have an Aqualab. Have you seen any other better measurement tools for water activity?
Yeah, so GemmaCert has a great product. I think they make a fairly affordable, maybe not your everyday consumer is not going to go out and buy this, but a brand or an LP should be able to fit that in there. The Aqualab, I think, is the brand. They make it's called a pocket, and this one's really cool. A lot of our reps actually have the pockets because it's mobile. You can take it wherever. I think they're around 2,000 USD.
Okay.
And so if you're in a facility, you have one of those, and someone can literally walk around in your vault and check cannabis right on the spot. It takes, under a minute, I believe, to get a reading back. So it's pretty quick and handheld. And again, if you don't have access to one of these, we will come to your facility and do all of this water activity testing. So we'll have boots on the ground. We'll be there. We can walk through it. If you had just bought a water activity machine and you want, our expertise in running through the best way to use it and all that, we're here for you on that as well. So
there was also a question about squishing that popped up. I want to address that about rosin. There are a few people that I know that are more experienced in experimenting with different humidity levels in terms of the kind of yield that they can achieve when they're squishing or making rosin, pressing rosin. Sean Burfellow out in BC, is he's actually got a number of videos on YouTube. If you just look up on YouTube, John Burfellow rosin or John Burfellow, even water activity. I think he's got a couple of videos on water activity. He's discovered how to manipulate the flower to create the greatest yield outputs. And it varies a little bit by cultivar, but there is an argument for having a change in the actual water activity immediately before the squishing process. So it's a very good question, and there are resources, Canadian resources like John Burfellow and
I think Justin Hirsch too.
the professor, Professor Hirsch.
I think he's doing a lot of testing with that as well too. So yeah, the information's out there. And again, just to reiterate, like we're an open book and we love people coming to us with questions, challenging things that we've said or put out, and we want to learn and get better, like I said. So please reach out, and we're more than happy to engage with you and bring the right people from our team in to address any concerns, questions that you might have. But we're all in this together, and our end goal, we're not the star of the show. We never want to be the star of the show. The cannabis, your brand, is the star of the show. We're the sideshow. We're here to make sure that when you show up on game day, you're in the best condition and you're making that impact on that consumer when they consume your product. And that's what we're here to do. And this is outside of more of the technical stuff, but we have a great marketing team, and a lot of energy and time is put towards marketing and educating consumers about terpenes and quality cannabis. And so there's a huge opportunity to partner with us on that as well as a brand, to really heighten and up your level of education and information that you're putting out to the marketplace. So that's what we're here for.
And we've all got to get better. We've got to get better at Boveda. You've got to get better in production and distribution. We've got to deliver a better quality product and keep these brands relevant so that they can sustain and remain in the marketplace. Consumers vote with their feet. They buy that which satisfies them, and we want to give the industry the opportunity to show the world that cannabis can be the fulcrum of change that it's capable of being. So we have a responsibility to each other and a responsibility to the plant to do our best to put the best quality product in the marketplace and take care of those consumers so that they get healthy and keep coming back.
Thank you. I think that's a great segue to highlight the fact that we hope to have your Director of Research and Development, Brian Rice. We hope that he can come north and join us in October at the Grow Up Conference, where we have a technical session on how to lose a crop in 10 days, I believe is the title. And it's just, everything that you've both mentioned, and the research that Boveda has done to highlight how we can create a better quality cannabis.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. Brian's great. He's got a lot of knowledge up in his head.
He certainly does. Yeah, it's great. I look forward to that. Thank you so much for this. We hope to see you in October at the Grow Up Conference. If not, you can catch Drew at MJ BizCon. He'll be the tallest person in the smoking circle.
Yes.
I always did want to know if was it cigars that brought you to Boveda, or was it Boveda that brought you to cigars?
Cigars brought me to Boveda. I was in a cigar store and I bought a selection of cigars, and the clerk, the owner of the store, put a Boveda pack in my bag and said the magic words to me. He said, "You'll never recharge your humidor again." And I had this sort of spiritual experience. And he said, "Yeah, if you want to meet them, they're located right downstairs." And I discovered that at the time, the headquarters of Boveda was in the windowless lower level of a strip mall in Minnetonka, Minnesota, a town that's known for Lake Minnetonka and Prince driving around on a motorcycle with Apollonia, wasn't he? Yeah, you're a big Prince guy. Way to go. Yeah, so cigars brought me to Boveda, and then I went to a few cannabis shows on Boveda's behalf, and I discovered just how much fun it is to turn people onto this solution. And I'm hooked. I'm one of those weird carnival barker type people that just loves the energy of being at a show and getting people turned on to having fresh, delicious cannabis flowers. So
Great. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thanks, everybody.
Love you guys a lot. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, thanks. Ab.
All the best. We'll see you.
Hopefully soon in Canada.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.